I'm Dennis Anderson. Here's what's coming up on Almanac North. There has been a sharp rise in Asian hate crimes across the country since the pandemic began. Tonight, we will learn more about what local Asian Americans have experienced. We'll talk with members of the Twin Ports ADIPA Collective and find out what they are doing to help combat this racism. And our Lessons from COVID-19 series continues as we meet a Hibbing family and find out how the pandemic changed their lives. These stories and voices of the region coming up on Almanac North. Hello and welcome to Almanac North. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Dennis Anderson. Julie is off this week as we continue to maintain social distancing here in the studio. Duluth's American Indian Community Housing Organization has received a major award from the McKnight Foundation. ACO's arts program was recognized as a regional cultural treasure and received a $500,000 grant from the foundation. The award is part of a new $12.6 million initiative of the McKnight Foundation. At a news conference Monday, the grassroots group Duluth Community Safety Initiative proposed several changes to the city's policing practices. The group is calling for more community involvement and oversight of police and has proposed some alternative methods of law enforcement. You can find more information about these proposals at their website, leanduluth.org. Superior Mayor Jim Payne will give his State of the City address next week. Payne will deliver his speech at the Cedar Lounge Earthrider Brewery outdoor space at 7 p.m. Thursday. Payne was first elected mayor back in 2017 and previously served on the Douglas County Board. And in a sign that we are returning to normal, two major Duluth tourist attractions are opening up. The North Shore Scenic Railroad began running its regular summer schedule of trips today from the Duluth Depot. And the SS William A. Irvin opened for the 2021 season. The floating museum will be open Friday, Saturday, and Sundays for now. Anti-Asian hate crime in large cities in America has increased 145% in 2020, according to a study at California State University. The study found the spike began in March of 2020 as COVID cases grew and there was negative stereotyping of Asians related to the pandemic. Recently, we spoke with Kim Nordine, who was born in South Korea and grew up in Duluth, about the rise of Asian hate.
Seoul is the city in South Korea where I was born. I was adopted when I was 8 months old, and I came here to Duluth, and I've never left. Being a woman and being a woman of color in Duluth, I think, well, there's just so many layers to that. Growing up in Duluth, I know what it's like to be the only person of color. The school I went to, I remember being one of the very few Asian people and just people of color in general. And that's been pretty much my entire life. And being adopted into a white family, I really haven't had that opportunity to even embrace my own culture. You know, COVID and all of the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes. When it first started happening, basically people were blaming the Asian community for COVID. And that was really scary because for the first time in my life, I felt fearful of going out. And I remember shortly after that, I think it was last March, we had some people come cut down some trees in our yard. And I just remember when I went out to meet with them, I was looking at them and just really trying to read, like, are you guys cool with me because I'm Asian? Or I work for an organization that supports rural communities. And so I used to travel quite frequently to rural communities. And so just thinking about that, just all of the anxiety around that was really hard and scary. And I still have that fear. And I think the worst part, though, is just having a son and knowing that he is going to experience the same racism that I experienced when I was a child. But on top of that, now it's amplified because of everything that's been going on. And it's impacting him, and he's saying things like, oh, I'm ashamed to be Asian, and he's not turning on his camera for his Zoom meetings for school because he's feeling shame of who he is, which is just heartbreaking. I think that has definitely been the hardest part, having him try to process it too. I can't even process it, so it's been really hard to feel afraid for your life and for your safety. You can't ever stop hoping that this will get better, and there are so many horrible things happening in the world right now for a lot of different people. There's also some really great stuff happening, and there's so many people that want to help. And we're talking with our son, and we're learning as much as we can, and we're continuing learning as much as we can. And the Asian community is kind of left out of the conversation. And there's just, the myth of the model minority, where Asian people don't experience racism, or Asian people are smart and they are doctors and lawyers. And those generalizations, I think, are really hurtful and are really such a stereotype, and it's just very untrue. As a culture, Asian people tend to be on the more quiet side, and we need a seat at the table too, and we need people to stand up for our community too. On the flip side too, Asian people like me and others that own businesses or maybe have a little bit more of a platform to help get the word out, then we really do need to step up, and we need to use our voice.
A local group is working to educate people and put an end to this racism. The group calls itself the Twin Ports Asian Pacific Islander Desi Americans Collective. Joining us now is Julie Kim of the Twin Ports ADIPA Collective, and Melissa Ho is also a member of the collective. Ladies, thank you both for being here, and this is going to be an interesting discussion. There's so much of this hate that has been shown on television and other news sources that has seemed to have sprung up once the pandemic began. Melissa, tell us why the Twin Ports ADIPA Collective was formed. What's it all about?
Well, it was a very grassroots, organically kind of formed group. Initially, it was just a social group for Asian American women, or just Asian women in general.
Sure.
It was a situation in which I think Julie was like, I didn't know there were other Asian women here, and I was like, well, I'm one of the few minority. And then as like the group kind of went out, it's like, well, yeah. I know two people, and so we kind of just had a social group. They had potlucks, little meals, kind of telling each other about events going on, and then the pandemic hit. And so then the potlucks and the social gatherings and this outlet that we had, getting to know each other, we had to find other ways.
Sure.
And then there was the violence, and then there was the be safe out there. Someone said something to me. I'm driving around and people are yelling at me now. I don't know what's going on. And we started being more supportive of each other. And a letter was written on behalf of a few of our members, and a bunch of us put our names on it, saying that this is something we need to be aware of. We want to get in front of it. We don't want the Twin Ports to have an incident where there's going to be something like that. And immediately afterwards, the Atlanta shooting happened. And so some of our members got together and created a candlelight vigil, and we just went from there.
So Julie, what are the goals of the group?
The goals of the group are more, especially support for Asian Americans that live in this community, but also really wanting education about different Asian ethnicities and cultures as well, looking at the school system as well as just educating people in general. Also to reduce and eliminate stereotypes about Asian people, I think is very significant, because I think a lot of the hate crimes have stemmed from history-long stereotypes that have occurred.
The president has now signed an anti-hate bill into law, so it's now the law of the land, or will be soon. How is that going to help, if at all?
Well, I think it'll help because now it's a recognition. It's the first step. It's a recognition that, we do matter in this country as well. There needs to be a recognition that doing something to somebody just based on color, just based on innuendo, based on stereotypes is wrong. And to be included into that conversation is something that a lot of Asian Americans have been wanting for a while. We're kind of described as the quiet ones or the invisible people. And even though Asian Americans have added so much to the American diaspora, like we have been a part of American history since pretty much the beginning. And the success of America has also been due to a lot of Asians and Asian Americans. We're never recognized for that. And so that's the first step. And that's the first step in a long step of saying, yes, you are American also.
So Julie, how can community members help your organization? What can they do to support you people?
One of the things at the vigil, it was very planned and organized within a few hours. And then when we actually had the vigil, over 100 participants came.
Really?
So that was really significant for us because it was so heartwarming as well to think that there's all of these people out there that came on such short notice to be there for us. I think the other thing is that to be bystanders to violence. Some people say, well, there's no reports of Asians being physically harmed in Duluth. Well, Asians are being harmed in Duluth in microaggressions, glares, people that tell us to go back to our own country.
It isn't always getting knocked down and beaten or kicked.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the verbal threats, the Asian slurs.
Yeah. So, Melissa, are there any Minnesota laws that specifically prevent or address the issue of hatred?
Hate crimes in general, I'm not familiar, but there's definitely none that specifically target for Asian Americans or people of minority status. I don't believe that there is anything very specific, although that is not something I looked into.
Yeah. What should someone do if they witness a hate incident?
They need to step in and do something. I think, recent story in New York with a woman of Filipino descent was attacked and people didn't do anything. In fact, one of the people in an apartment lobby just shut the door.
Yeah, they closed the door on her, and this was security guards.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's like if somebody's being harmed, you need to help people. And so we don't feel like we're so isolated because walking around now is very fearful and just not sure if people are looking at you or just being more hyper aware of our surroundings.
And we've actually been, there are a few of us who have attended bystander training. There's actually a lot of videos out there, short little YouTube videos that tell you how to do some very non-invasive type of ways to help encourage protection with a bystander. So for instance, if you see someone being very aggressive with a person of minority descent or an elderly person or anything like that, there are other ways like you create familiarity, standing by them, just very, very small, subtle things to show that this person is not alone and that this person does have support. Those are some of the very first step type of deals. We actually, immediately with the wake of all of this, we started a Facebook page that, and through this entire month of the Asian Pacific.
Can you give us the address for that page?
Oh yeah, it's the TPAC. It's the Twin Ports AP.
Yeah, it's just TPAC.
I see. Okay,
TPAC.
so
I'm sorry.
the general public can plug
Yeah.
into it and take a look.
Yeah, and you can take a look there. And actually, this entire month, we've actually had a posting for every day that talks about Asian Americans in history. And then right now, we're actually highlighting Minnesotan Asian Americans
Wonderful.
of note.
Good.
And so visit there. But we have a very, very good link that talks about. It's a short video that tells you about bystander training and things that you can do more. So like whether it's a Asian American.
Yeah,
or,
I wish we had a lot more time. We don't. We run out of time already. Melissa Ho, Julie Kim, thank you both for being here tonight.
Thank you very
for
much.
having us.
It's time now for Voices of the Region. Each week we hear from an area journalist with more on the stories they are covering. This week, Wisconsin Public Radio reporter Danielle Kaeding is our guest.
Decided to lift its mask resolution that it had in place during the public health emergency. And this is following the updated guidance from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Last Thursday, they came out and said that fully vaccinated people can not wear masks and avoid physically distancing as long as they've been vaccinated. It was pretty much broad consensus that this was a good time now to be lifting this mandate. Councillor Keith Kern was one of the first councillors to jump in to rescind this mask resolution. And as a business owner, he has, opposed the use or requiring the use of face coverings, saying that people can make those decisions for themselves or use their own best judgment. And that business owners really have every intention of protecting the public. It's in their best interest to do that. Health officials on Madeline Island estimate that they've reached around 80% of their residents who have been vaccinated. There were, I think, roughly 200 out of 300 residents who have been vaccinated at the La Pointe Community Clinic on Madeline Island. And then a number of residents have also gone off the island to receive the vaccine from either Ashland County or other local drugstores. And so, this is a little bit of a feat because if you think about it, Madeline Island, it's an island on Lake Superior. And so in order to get the vaccine to the island, those shipments had to be brought across by ferry. And then when the ferry quit running, they would go over to Bayfield and pick up the vaccine. With the tourism season likely picking back up, Madeline Island is a tourist hotspot for people in the Midwest. And so when visitors come to the island, hopefully their residents will be a little bit better protected. We're seeing multiple legal challenges in both Minnesota and Michigan regarding Enbridge Pipelines. And in Michigan, with Line 5, there's a real big concern that aging pipeline, both of these lines, which are more than 60 years old, that there is an increased risk of an oil spill, and particularly in the Great Lakes, where they're concerned that this could have the potential to impact a wide region, the Great Lakes, communities along the shoreline, and also just the water in general. And so this is a very big concern for Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer and also communities around the lakes. And Enbridge has said, with Line 5, that they have never had a pipeline, or that their line has never spilled in the Great Lakes. But the National Wildlife Federation has found that there have been at least roughly 30 spills that have occurred on land with this pipeline. Cenovus Energy, which is another Canadian oil company, bought Husky in a sale. I believe it was a multi-billion-dollar sale at the beginning of that closed at the beginning of this year. And so that was due in part to the COVID-19 pandemic and the reduced fuel demand that we saw across the country as COVID-19 shutdowns took place and people weren't traveling, and just reduced demand in general. And so now that Husky has been acquired by Cenovus Energy, everything is still moving forward as planned. I believe the timelines and the amount of money that they're planning to spend on this rebuild has ticked up slightly, just because of some of the delays that we've seen. If I'm not mistaken, I believe the cost of the project has now increased to $950 million to rebuild that refinery, and then they're hoping to maybe have it back in operation in the first quarter of 2023.
Our Lessons from COVID-19 series continues now with a look at how the pandemic impacted a Hibbing family. The Cedar family had to make some big changes when Hibbing Public Schools switched to distance learning. It was all to ensure a smooth transition for their 4th, 2nd, and 1st grade children.
Well, I kind of like both. Like staying at home and at school. Yeah, me too. Me three.
I'm Brittany Cedar, and this is my husband, Chuck Cedar Jr., and we are the parents of
Braxton, Weston, King.
Flexibility is the big lesson. I think one thing that came out of it is they were able to work more at their own pace.
Someone who falls off their roof and then they lose their memory.
my whole world changed in basically overnight. I stopped working, so I was able to stay home with the kids, so that was a huge transition. And then when the kids finally did go back to school in January, it was actually a little bit bittersweet because who knew if that would ever happen again. One day the Seesaw app had crashed when we first transitioned to the distance learning because I think it was just overloaded. So that would have been one of the challenges that I would say we faced, just because you couldn't get the assignments turned in. I know even at one point there was a teacher that was having issues that was trying to do a Google Meetup from her home, and she sent out a message and just said, we're gonna have to cancel today because she wasn't getting any connectivity.
Sometimes you wouldn't have connectivity, or you'd be in the middle of your meeting and you'd drop out. Part of it was we had so many electronic devices all connected to the router and using bandwidth that it was causing some problems. So upgrading kind of helped that. If you live, out of town a little further, you don't have that sometimes ability to have the fast internet. So I think that could be a problem for some families. I liked the, when we started doing the distance learning, you got a little more familiar with the teachers. It allowed the communication to develop between the two, and that's continued. And I think that's been a nice feature or byproduct of the distance learning.
I think in school we had more communication with each other. Yeah, me too.
We tried to keep the schedule similar, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times,
We would wake up at 6.
yep, no matter whether we're in school or distance learning.
6 or 5:45.
I mean, it was a really neat insight into the education, and I actually liked seeing the lessons and being here with the kids and seeing what they're learning and how they were thriving and what they know and what they can do moving forward.
Braxton, your teacher, did a whole, for around Christmas time, I think, did a whole art project with the students. She recorded it and had all the instructions in the paper, and you kind of did it with her, but you did it at home.
Yeah.
And what did you make?
An elf.
Then Weston, your teacher, he had a project that he did with the students. He said, for 20-some years every year, and he didn't want to miss it. So he sent home, we picked up this from the Lincoln School. He made, what did you make?
It's a snowflake. Our teacher told us what beads to put on first and where to put them on.
We got to see an insight into the teacher, because sometimes they were doing their distance learning or their meeting from their own home.
2 and 1. Let it explode! I went way high.
And you got to see into the other students' homes. Kids were bringing pets. Here's my pet dog, or here's my, we have chickens today, and that was kind of really fun to see, I think, for the teachers as well. And for us to get to know the teachers, that's one thing I missed when the kids transitioned from like the preschool environment, where you're in the school talking to the teacher every day during drop-off and pick-up and things like that. And you kind of lost that a little bit when you get into the normal school setting, but this has brought some of that interaction between the teacher and the parents back.
You're kind of reevaluating where you were pre-pandemic versus during the pandemic, and thinking about slowing down, spending time as a family. You weren't really going anywhere for any significant amount of time, and sports were canceled. So we did have that time at home, time at the lake, time to just, like we said, when distance learning was done for the day, the kids would play in the backyard and have that together time, which was really nice.
Next week, our special series, Lessons from COVID-19, continues with a look at how local residents stepped up during the pandemic. We will hear from folks who lent a helping hand to our neighbors in need during this unprecedented time.
Okay, we're done now. My hope is that when we start having our bigger events again, that people will pause and think before they maybe get a little bit snarky. You know, there's a lot of angst and people have anxiety and stress due to COVID for numerous reasons. But as we're moving forward, let's move forward on being a little kinder, being a little more thoughtful, being thankful for what we have.
And for the latest updates, follow Almanac North on social media. You'll find us on Facebook and Twitter. The WDSE website is the place to go for program updates, news about the station, and our upcoming events. And download the PBS video app for on-demand viewing of your favorite programs. Thanks to our guests and the crew here in the studio. I'm Dennis Anderson. Stay healthy, everyone, and be kind.